Hello everyone, this is Sonia Byers, CEO of Women in Transport, and you're listening to the Women in Transport podcast. Here we uncover how the intersection of identities produces different experiences for different people. While some identities may be more privileged due to their class, race, gender or faith, others may experience inordinate discrimination. Join us as we hear from the women in transport and take an inspiring and analytical lens through which we will understand how power and privilege interface and cross over.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Women in Transport podcast. Today we are focusing on allyship, and this is in recognition of International Men's Day, the 16 Days of Activism against gender-based violence, and for White Ribbon Day. I am joined by special co-host Gary Lincoln and with two amazing guests. Over to you, Gary, and to our guests for introductions.
Yes, good morning. I'm Gary Lincoln. My day job is I'm the group director of a business called TXM, and my voluntary role is I'm the external partnerships lead for Women in Transport, and a keen advocate for everything to do with allyship.
Hello, good morning. I am Hira Ali, an executive coach and leadership development specialist. I'm also the founder of Advancing Your Potential, a champion of allyship programs and inclusive talent management initiatives. And I am the author of two transformational books, I'd like to believe: Her Way to the Top, a guide to smashing the glass ceiling, and Her Allies, a practical toolkit to help men lead through advocacy.
Good morning. I'm David Hampson-Ghani. I'm a senior program manager at Transport for London. I'm currently working on the High Speed 2 program for Transport for London. I'm a White Ribbon ambassador, and I'm becoming an ally for the team back at TfL, my program team and the wider team there. And I will be taking part in the 16 Days of Action coming up in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, let's start with a pertinent question. So, what does it mean to be an ally? And I think we start with David on that question.
Well, that's a really difficult question for me, because I haven't really been an ally before, and this is new to me, and I'm learning every day as we go. So being an ally is a bit alien, but I didn't mean that to be an alliteration trick question. I think my colleagues know what I do and what I am, but they probably wouldn't use that word. They would probably call it a critical friend or a supportive colleague. What does it mean to me? Well, it's really to be able to stand by somebody, stand with somebody, be the support they need at the pace they need it. Not necessarily as an expert or a hero or even a warrior, but just someone on their side, someone who's got their back, to share their voice, amplify their voice, and speak up for them, and knowing that their voice will be heard and will have another voice alongside them. So I'm waiting to find out how that feels and works in practice. And what I do in my role as a White Ribbon ambassador and a people leader at TfL is demonstrate those behaviours and exhibit those behaviours. Yeah, that's how I see it.
Yeah, brilliant. So you mentioned that we're all on a learning curve with this. What have you learned most over the time that you've been? I think we've all become allies, but what's the key learning you would take from that?
The key learning is not to be afraid. For me as an ally, even if it feels a little bit like an imposter syndrome. As I say, I'm not an expert. I'm not a hero. I'm certainly not a warrior. Actually, what I've learned is just being there and listening and taking a supportive side to the individual is a massive help, and it makes a difference. The smallest thing makes a difference.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, good. Shireen, what your take on what's it mean to be an ally?
I really like how David put it around just kind of having people's backs. And whenever, like in this new space of intersectionality, whenever I speak to people about allyship, I always feel like we can get lost behind language. And I feel like we just break down some of the language that it's just about being friendly, exactly how you would be to a family member or a friend of yours. You have each other's back. You might point out things that other people might not point out. You might look for opportunities that other people might not look out. And it's just the extension of that 6 degrees of separation around who is in our network. And it's just seeing it for other people. And I think when we sometimes use words like privilege, the way I like to see it is that we're all privileged in some respect, but how can I use that privilege to lift up other people who might not have the same opportunities as me?
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, and Hira, you're the expert on this, having written a brilliant book on the very same subject. So we'll go to you next, because
Gosh, thank you so much. I shudder when I'm called an expert because I think I'm still on a learning and evolving journey myself. But I absolutely loved how David was showing so much humility, because I'm pretty sure he is an ally, but saying that, oh, I'm not an ally. And I think to that point, what Shireen said, it's important to not get caught up in the terminology. A lot of people dismiss the word ally. They don't want to be called an ally, which is absolutely fine, because we need to focus more on actions rather than the words or the labels that we use, right? And an ally, as Shireen, you pointed out, could be anybody who is privileged or advantaged. And you could be privileged not just as a result of your gender, but because of your skin color, because of your socioeconomic background, your ability. So many different aspects where I am privileged, even being an Asian, brown, Muslim immigrant woman. So I think acknowledging that privilege and leveraging that privilege to help those who are not privileged. And again, not warriors, as David said, not saviors, not knights in shining armors. They are there to support us, work with us collaboratively, side by side, as co-pilots and advocates and mentors and sponsors and defenders and amplifiers and so on. So many different words for it. But yes, I think what is important in allyship, from my perspective, is it's not a one-off thing. It is an ongoing, consistent commitment.
yeah, brilliant. And so, what made you write the book then? Because it's a brilliant book, it's a best-selling book. What made you take the initiative and the time and the effort to write a book about allyship?
Thank you for asking that question, Carrie. I think the reason why I wrote this was because when I wrote Her Way to the Top, my first book on women leadership, I used to go and speak to different organizations in the public and private sector. And there I would meet very well-intentioned male allies who wanted to support, who wanted to be allies, but didn't really know how to go about it. And I think for me specifically, there was a trigger point when there was a horrific rape incident back in my home country. And I said, okay, this is it. I need to create a simple manual, a manual which doesn't shame or blame people, but invites them to this allyship journey and explains in simple terms as to what we can do. And sometimes it's just basic things. I think a lot of us don't realize, irrespective of gender, there's certain basic things which we can do to show up. It doesn't have to be grand gestures. So that's the reason why I wrote it. And I think women also felt that, we're doing enough. How about men? What about men? So I think it was all of that which prompted me to finally write this book.
Just on that question, you said that women are doing enough. Do you think women do enough to support each other, though, as her allies, in terms of allies in the workplace as well? Because I've seen very examples of where senior women don't leave the ladder down for the next generation. They take the ladder up behind them. So
Yes.
I've challenged that in that comment on that women are doing enough. I would like to understand your
And I
take on that.
accept the challenge, Gary, because you are right. It's not just men. I think women can be allies to each other too. That is such an important observation, because I think a lot of times we feel, well, it's men who's going to do it, but it's not just men. I think women are also in a privileged position, could be in a privileged position as a result of their skin color, as a result of their position, as a result of the experience. And if they are not able to extend that support to women, then even if men are helping, nothing is going to work. So I think we all need to collaboratively work. Yes, the book has been written for men, but I at all do not imply, and I'm sure Shireen agrees with this too, that women cannot step up and be allies to each other too, because there has been historically, unfortunately, a lot of instances where we have examples of queen bees and some other terminologies where women have not extended that support which other women need. So I think we need to look into that.
Yeah.
Can I come back
Sorry,
on the
David.
privilege question? Sorry to jump in there, because I think people see privilege as, they interpret that differently as well. And one of the things I've been thinking of is that could be access. So I may have access to different layers that some people don't have access to, and it's not about gender, skin color, and that access can open doors and unlock things that can help in the allyship. So I think access is another.
And actually, Hira, just on that gender piece that Gary quite rightly mentioned, I really agree. I think, we are in a space, and that's where Women in Transport is a really great network, actually, where we genuinely are there about the advancement of all women in the transport sector, and everyone can join as long as you're kind of up for that objective. But I've had conversations in doing this whole intersectionality piece where some women have said, I had it so hard, I really don't want to help other women. Because if I
Yeah.
have to go through it, then why shouldn't you? But I feel like the bravery of them actually acknowledging that that's where their bias sits, and the fact they're willing to kind of move the dial a little bit, but also shows how hard they did have it, and they didn't have allies around them, and what a kind of trauma response, which is that I'm not going to help other people, I'm going to pull that ladder back up.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so I think that moves on to nicely in terms of examples of where we've seen and what examples of how allyship looks in the workplace. And David, you and I were speaking previously about the example of making the tea in a very male-dominated room. And if you would like to express that, how we were talking about that, that'd be great.
Okay, well, it's not my example, so no. It's a third party, but this is an example of a colleague of mine at Transport for London, who was in a relatively new in post. And she is in any case quite a strong woman, and she was in this big meeting, and she was the only woman. She was a woman of color, and this was a room full of old white men, I think, basically, if I characterize it that way. And the meeting started, and somebody said, oh, could you get the teas, love? Pointing at this woman, and as though that was naturally the role for that person. And keeping her powder dry, she did that. She got up and got out of the room and made the teas, and came back with a tray of teas, passed them around, and instead of putting sugar or any other additive, she added salt to all the teas. And the first person that drank the tea spat it out and said something with lots of expletives in it, and her reply was, don't effing ask me to do that again, ever. And that was just, I think this was some time ago, so put that in perspective. But that's the sort of thing that could easily happen. Well, could relatively easily happen now in a slightly different context. Just stereotyping a role based on gender or color or anything, and that bias is prevalent. We don't even realize it. So that was an example. I would actually like to think that would never happen at TfL today, but it may happen in a slightly more nuanced way. So had someone been in the room, had play forward, fast forward to that scenario playing out today, how would that work? Now, if I was in the room, I'd like to think I would do something, stand up, be a bit more active, proactive about it. But I just like to think that would happen. But that could be an example of what does happen. So how do you react in those circumstances? You would you say something like, that's not an appropriate thing to say. That doesn't conform to our policies. I mean, you don't want to be holier than thou, but there are tools and methodologies you can use to diffuse, deflect that particular situation without embarrassing anyone. could be, come on, that's totally old-fashioned. That's not that person's job. This is, can I introduce you to the director of passenger services?
I don't think it needs to be massive gestures either. I think in that scenario, even me standing up and saying, I'll get the teas this time would be, I think that's enough sometimes. I don't think you need to, sometimes you don't need, sometimes it needs calling out, and I totally get that. But I don't think it needs to be massive gestures of, we're going to embarrass people. I think it just could be that actually, no, I'll get the teas this time around, and actually do that as a way of sort of raising the point without embarrassing people as well, and then using that.
But actually, you do want to modify the behaviour, so you making the teas this time might still elicit that response the next time. So you do need to maybe offline quietly, but that was quite an extreme example, and there could easily be more day-to-day, low-level activities. And I think it's probably that low-level annoyance that not enough to trigger a threshold, not enough to trigger a response, but probably still winds people up.
It's the low-level systematic stuff that comes into play. And here you probably have to help me out on this, but I know there's loads of statistics around women traditionally doing a lot of the office housework, and some of that might range from making the teas. It might range from, the person. I've had instances where they've all looked at the female to be the note taker in the room, regardless of seniority level, and you think, you're paying me, I'll take the notes, all right. But actually you think, is that appropriate? And here I'm sure there's other
and women, and particularly women of color, are assigned all this office housework. So I think that's something to pay attention to, and assuming whenever a woman, or particularly a woman of color, enters the room, that she is going to be an assistant or a note taker or somebody who's not in a senior leadership position. And it's called unconscious demotion. I know there is somebody who came up with this term, but it is unconscious demotion, because we see this all the time. And to your point, Shireen, this is the kind of culture women at the top have been exposed to. So there's a reason why they have experienced so much trauma. And sometimes we feel like, I'm going to be selfish, I'm not going to help people around me. It's because it's the trauma talking. It's the everyday sexism which they have experienced on a regular basis, dehumanizing behaviors, just belittling them, condescending them. They say microaggressions are a death by 1,000 cuts, and that's not an exaggeration. It's true, right? Because there's so many little things that happen on a regular basis. And I think, again, to your point, Gary and David, it doesn't have to be a massive gesture. It has to be something small. It could be like, can you please let her talk if somebody is being talked over, and allowing everyone to have their voice in the room. Or if somebody's idea is being taken, so reinforcing that it was that person's idea in the first place, and just calling out sexism. I mean, even when you're confronting, it doesn't have to be angry confrontation. It could just be as little as, did you really say that? Or can you explain this? Or what do you mean by that? When people are forced to explain, then they will also be pushed to self-reflect and hopefully not repeat the behavior again.
Yeah, no, that's spot on. From my perspective, I think some of this is education as well, because and I'm pretty honest about this. 7 years ago, I probably wouldn't have cared, if I'm honest. I've been around engineering and construction and rail industry for many, many years, predominantly very white middle-aged guys and around that environment, and overlooked a lot of stuff previously that I'm probably not proud of now. But actually, by going for an education, actually working with the people at Women in Transport and other organisations, I've gone on a massive education and actually self-awareness journey for myself, and actually realising when those microaggressions out, when actually I can step in and go, actually, you know what, that's not acceptable anymore, or it wasn't acceptable then, but it's definitely not acceptable now. And little examples such as when women come back from maternity leave, how do they get treated when the first day they come back in the office? Either is it deemed that we've just got another pair of hands in the office, let's get her to work, or do we look at it and go, actually, no, would I want my wife, girlfriend, mum, sister being treated like that in the workplace? And if the answer is no, then we go back and reframe it and then ask the question again and set the tone again. So I think it's about education as well. And I've certainly gone on a massive education and trying to understand what it's like to walk in other people's shoes as well, from different backgrounds, different genders, etc. Because I look through my lens, which is from a 55-year-old white middle-aged guy. And so think that's fundamentally important. You have to put yourselves in other people's shoes. And I realise that when you are the only, I mean, I've got some friends who are black, and they go, when they go into a room, they are the only black person in that room, and look at that and go, actually, how do I support that person rather than isolating that person? So that would be my take on it.
That's really deep, Gary, and I really love the honesty about your journey, and that really nicely takes us into the next question around barriers. But I think just that general understanding of, you know, how does it relate to me? How can I empathize and sympathize with another person? And with all the intersectionality work, you know, there's no way that you can walk in every single person's shoes, and there's no way that we should expect every single person to self-declare where they're at and all that kind of stuff, because, you know, there is an element of privacy and people trying to live their own lives as well. But if we show that love and that kindness and that openness and that allyship, you're kind of making that people, they don't have to self-declare, they don't have to feel othered all the time, because you're already showing up as that ally, as that advocate, as that champion, just in your general leadership style and your general coaching style. And I think that those kind of things change the culture in any organization, because then people can bring their true self to work, their full self to work, which includes the good stuff and also the really ugly stuff, because you know, human life is really messy and it's really chaotic, but that's okay, because in that chaos and in that messiness comes really good stuff. So, you know, how can we support people in that way? So bringing us to the question around barriers to being an ally, Gary, I might actually come to you first, because you did open up about your journey, and we did speak a little bit about language as well. What do you think the barriers could have been, might have been on your journey and others that you know of?
One of the barriers, I think, is not a self-awareness of himself, and actually not understanding what it's like to be the marginalised group in that room or in that whatever it might be. I think fear as well, being called out, sort of in certain environments. There's a sort of term around the male sort of banter, you're so busy, blah, blah. But actually, I think there's an element of fear that you're being the one who's standing out on the pedestal to call this out. I think there's another barrier could be education. People aren't willing to educate themselves. I think when you go to these ED&I events, me and you have spoken about this previously, they're brilliant, but we're talking within an echo chamber. Those people are in the room because they're all on the same bus, and actually we all want it to make change. The people who aren't in the room, either they're not in the room for a reason, but actually there's a bigger environment outside who aren't either going for an education or don't care enough, or their life's not being impacted by it enough, that they're the ones that are the hearts and minds we've got to change, because the ones in the room we changed already. So I think there's some barriers around educational understanding what it's like to, and I think some of that comes when you start becoming an adult, and I mean adult in terms of having children, or your family circumstances change. So maybe your daughter or your son comes out as gay, and then all of a sudden you go, oh, is that they're going to have to go through some of the stuff that I've now seen in the workplace. And I think that's when you start opening your eyes to this sort of stuff. So I think the barriers of fear and lack of education, personally.
Really, really great stuff. Hira, I'll come to you, and then David, I'll come to you.
Right. So I think definitely it's lack of awareness. I completely agree with Gary. People genuinely don't know how they can support. And sometimes it's the little actions, as we said, that do count. And people don't notice because these things have been happening for a long time and they don't know any different, right? There is a fear of losing status or a zero-sum perspective that supporting women may lead to diminished opportunities for themselves. But that is a small percentage. I would still say, I think a big one is that, you know, despite the good intentions, they fear that they will face intense scrutiny and they will be seen as part of the problem versus part of the solution. And of course, I think the big one is the natural fear of judgment and you know, backlash and disapproval from male peers, which actually has a term called the dreaded wimp penalty, because men are stigmatized through association when they are supporting women initiatives at work, and they often feel you know, men often look to other men for affirmation of their masculinity. And sometimes when they're talking about gender bias, this means that there will be a potential loss of acceptance from male peers. And research does show that men experience social penalties, which are much harder than women face when they deviate from their respective gender scripts. So that's also a consideration to take into account.
Oh, it's so deep. Oh my God. I wasn't actually expecting you to say that, but I can really understand how that could come to play when we're looking at each other for that validation. And then what is it that society actually validates what behaviors? So really interesting. David, to you.
Well, I'm going to add fear to one of my barriers, but when I was thinking about this, I was thinking more about confidence, and lack of confidence that you can be an ally, make a difference, help somebody, might prevent you from even starting. If I've got a big banner that says I'm an ally, does that raise unrealistic expectations of what might happen? And I'll bring in the White Ribbon campaign now, because actually in a couple of weeks I'll be working alongside some colleagues going to various construction sites. Our campaign this year is about reaching out to the construction industry, and I'll be going into a huge construction site, part of the HS2 program. The site's got over 2,500 people. We're going there over 4 days, and we might be in the firing line, and I've got to have that confidence aura around me to say I know what I'm talking about. And I'll be talking to the very colleagues, the very people in the workforce, Gary, that you mentioned. By the way, I don't think you look a day over 35. Those people in the workforce that probably haven't educated themselves or moved along with the times, and might feel they're being talked at, and told stuff that they sort of know but don't want to hear you tell them. So that's going to be interesting. But this is a construction site where there are women as well. There are women in all sorts of roles, professional as well as more, let's say, domestic roles. That's inevitable, I suppose, on a construction site. But everyone needs the benefit of an ally or supportive infrastructure around them. And I think, at a construction site, one of the things that is inevitable will be banter. What is genuine, inclusive, humorous chatter, and what is nasty banter? Well, each end of the spectrum is obvious, but in the middle, there's a murky grey zone that really navigating that is quite tricky. But exactly as Gary said, a lot of people will be part of a family with female relatives, wives, mothers, aunts, daughters, and as soon as you switch on that lens, I think it does completely change things. So I'm looking forward to this exercise. Maybe I'll come back in a few months and tell you how it went. But that, we're hoping to switch on the light in a way there, and show examples. And at TfL we have got some tools in the toolbox to help us. We have a campaign called Active Bystander. You may have seen posters and adverts on the tubes and buses. Simple little things that you can help deflect, deflate, diffuse a situation without active intervention, if I may put it that way. So yeah, I think for me it's confidence, knowing I can do it, will make a difference, and despite all those little demons on my shoulder saying, "Oh, this is scary," yeah, get in there.
Can I just add about the social part to this? So when you're at school, we're very when you see bullying or you see a fight in the playground, I mean, you see them worse now because they film it and then they send it on social media. So, I think there's an element of that childhood thing where we're quite happy to look upon it, but we're not happy. We're putting ourselves out to stop that bullying or stop that fight in the playground and it all looks terrible and you hate it generally. But the bystander thing. And I think if we would talk about certain industries, especially industries we're around, transport, we're very good at that walk by health and safety, but we don't portray that in terms of this. And this is as important as health and safety. I know, well, hopefully we don't know, but health and safety, we're going to potentially help someone not get killed or not get seriously injured. But this is, I mean, actually, we talk about mental health as well. Socially, if we don't walk by, this could save someone or help someone progress their career, etc. So I think the don't walk by is important in terms of this banter, and I think we have to be careful about the banter and the language thing as well, because we don't want to live in such a what's the word, diluted sort of, everyone's okay and we can't say anything funny to each other. I think I think that's a bit of an element of where we are moving in society, and I think if we take that out of it, then we are in trouble. But I think there's an element of banter and language that comes into it, and banter sometimes can be the curse of laziness in terms of that. But I think there's an element of society's got to play its game in terms of that don't walk by stuff.
There's so much in there for what you've both just picked on. I want to come back to a couple of things, and then here I want to come to you. But David, like both of you, so David, I want to come back to you about the white ribbon. Can you, just for those who are listening and don't know enough about the campaign, could you go to a little bit of detail of what it actually is, and what TfL are doing for this?
Sure. So White Ribbon is an international campaign, and it's a charity in the UK, and its aims are to end all violence against women and girls by men and boys. So it's very specific, and there is a pledge that we invite people, men, to sign up to. That will be one of the activities we will be undertaking when we go to these sites, to understand what the campaign is about, to end violence towards women and girls by men and boys, and to sign up and take that pledge, and not just sign a bit of paper and walk away, but actually understand what it means. It's I say, it's an international campaign, and TfL has embraced it, along with Network Rail and a lot of the train operating companies and a lot of associated industries to the transport and rail industries. And yeah, this year, one of our initiatives is to go into construction sites, reach out into construction sites where TfL, in our case, have got an interest or an influence, and open the door to the contracting organizations. Construction sites are still largely male dominated. Interestingly, there's a huge range of diversity on sites, albeit mostly male gendered, lots of different backgrounds and languages, and cultures. So that's going to be an interesting dynamic. So it's easier within TfL, not for it to be mandated as such, but it forms part of a value framework, a behavior framework. A bit more difficult to go to a third party and a third party's workforce and say, hey, this too. And probably there are pockets of, I think, Hira, you mentioned about sort of male self-aggrandizement, if you like. That it's a tribe, and that's what you have to do in that tribe. And maybe we can just help break that down, and that it will change perception. We are trying to do a before and after survey to see whether the women on those sites notice a difference or perceive a difference, either on that site or generally. So yeah, that's what we're doing. Starts on the 25th of November. There's a big launch at some of the main transports, the railway hubs in London. And then there's 16 days of action that runs out to the 10th of December.
Amazing, thank you. Hira, I'd like to bring you in. So about the 16 days of action and the White Ribbon campaign, because this very much kind of takes allyship to extremes. We've been talking about like real life stuff around violence, and you mentioned around microaggressions. And the point of this podcast isn't to say like one demographic is really bad or anything like that. It's just highlighting really world issue things that are happening. So I'd like to get your perspectives on all of those campaigns and what that really means in the round of being a genuine ally.
People think that on the spectrum, we are not that bad. We don't go around raping women or murdering women, so it doesn't apply to us. But I think what we need to understand is that there's a hierarchy, and at the very bottom is where we start with normalizing sexualized behaviors towards women, objectifying women, all of that language which we use, that is at the very bottom. And at the very top is, of course, murder and rape and other things. And people at work need to understand that a lot of their women colleagues, they may not mention, but they may be a victim of sexual abuse, financial abuse, emotional abuse. So how do you spot the signs? How do you extend the support? Because violence is not something which is happening in isolation. It is connected. As an ally, you need to be visible. You need to be very vigilant and see if there are female colleagues who might be, a victim of any form of abuse whatsoever, not just physical, but there's so many different forms of abuses, emotional, financial, and so on and so forth. So I think these campaigns are very important. They are critical. They create awareness, and many people, I cannot tell you how many times I meet well-intentioned men in my circle who say, but women are all right. There's nothing happening. They're progressing. They're okay. And I'm like, just because they don't share it with you, and just because they don't share, or they're not being vulnerable with you, doesn't mean everything is fine. So I think these campaigns are important. Also understanding that gender violence is not something which is happening outside. It is very much impacting women at the workplace too. So what can we do as allies to make these women feel safe and create that psychological safety for them to progress as they should? Because otherwise, all of these threats that we face from the external and internal world, a lot of people told me when I wrote her allies, why are you talking about sexual harassment? Why are you talking about gender violence? And I said, well, this is very much relevant. It is not something which the workplace should not be aware of. This is all interconnected. So yeah, I personally feel that these the white ribbon campaign, all other campaigns that are being run to create awareness are so crucial.
Amazing. Thank you, Hira, and thanks for connecting those together. Gary, I was going to come to you actually. I feel like you've got a follow-up question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we all, to quote David's phrase, we all want to be part of a tribe or a gang or whatever. And I think that's why those videos, when you see kids getting bullied or fighting in playgrounds, I think it's easier to be part of the tribe than it is to stand outside the tribe and make a difference. And I think that sometimes comes into the workplace. I think it's becoming less and less, thankfully, but it was becoming years ago when I've heard of some horror stories that in apprenticeships getting sort of coated with tar and feathers and things like that. I mean, none of that stuff happens anymore, but that's all part of it. And at the time, that was banter. That was what was happening. It doesn't happen anymore. So I think we are moving the dial. We're just probably not moving it as quick as we'd like to. Hira, I was going to pull up on a few points. You wrote that great book. I did be curious to understand what three, and I know you've got a whole book of the whole subject, but three great tips that this could go away and sort of actually implement actually on Monday when they go away and then come into the workplace and go, actually, you know what? Those three things will make a massive difference, and they don't have to be big, massive gestures either. So that would be great, I think, to cap it off.
Okay, so I think my process is simple. I always say challenge yourself first, because that's the easiest, I would say, before challenging others. And when you're challenging others, I think recognize your privilege, acknowledge your bias. I think we all are biased. One thing we need to do is recognize, we can't say that, oh, I'm not biased, because you're dismissing science. So recognize where that bias exists, taking a step back and questioning yourself. Am I making any assumptions on the basis of this person's gender or socioeconomic status or faith, ethnicity, and so on and so forth? And flipping the question, right? If you not be asking man this question, then why would you be asking a woman this question? For example, questions like, oh, so who's going to look after the kids? Or do you think you're ready for this position? So all these kind of questions. And then acknowledging responsibility. On the allyship journey, we will make mistakes. I make mistakes all the time. What do you do after you make the mistake? Are you recognizing that you made a mistake? Are you genuinely apologetic? And what are you going to do afterwards? So these things, and then stepping up to challenge others. Challenging others would include not being angry or confrontational, but sometimes it's about not responding, not engaging, just hitting the pause button or asking a reflective question. What did you mean by that? Did you really say that? Or just giving the examples and then considering whether that confrontation or that calling in, as they would call it, would be public or private. That is also really important. And then, of course, challenging the organization culture at large, looking at every policy from right from your recruitment to your appraisal to your comp and ben policies. Events need to be inclusive. Women sometimes cannot go and interact at events after work after 5 or 6, and what are these events like? Not all women like to drink alcohol, not all women like to go to events which are sporty events. So maybe try and consider how networking can be inclusive. So all these little things which you can take into consideration. And also the last but most important point, you do not need to be a DI professional or an HR practitioner or a organization head to be able to enact these changes. You could be a person at any level in the organization, and you could still be aware, and through your awareness you can make other people aware. And I think that's the important point to note, that you don't have to be the head of the department to be able to be an ally. Anyone can be an ally, whatever their position or level in the organization.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, very good. Very love it. Good. Shireen, I'm going to come to you next. I'm curious because I think you've been on the other side of being on the allyship. How does it feel to be on the other side of being around allies? Some of the work you do with women in transport and some of the other work you do. I think you've probably got a few takes on actually the other side and what it makes you feel like. And I'll leave it to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Gary. And equally to other guests as well, where we've experienced just when it's really worked. And just to give a bit of context, I'm a Muslim, I'm a Pakistani British woman, so there's a few kind of intersections there. I come from quite a normal kind of mid-range working class family, so really just like average stuff. But with all of that comes definitely biases. And I think we mentioned today around education. I think certainly education applies to everyone. So I've been in situations where I didn't realize I was being subjected to biases, or I was being othered. I didn't realize that, because you're just kind of told that that's just how it is. And I've always been in the room where I've been the only many times, but I was used to it, so I thought that's just how it is. And I'm a very grateful person, and I've realized kind of as I've gotten a bit older actually where to place that gratitude. And so I used to, because I've worked on loads of major projects, I really look at my LinkedIn, I feel really proud of the stuff that I've done and where I've worked. But I used to always just be really happy to be in the room. And I'd be like, oh, gee whiz, and I get paid for this? Like, wowzers. And it's only now that I realised, I was in the room, I genuinely was the best person for that job. And I've had interviews where they've told me genuinely, you've interviewed against a couple hundred people who've applied for this job and you're the one that's got it. Never would have taken that as I'm the best person in the room. I would have just thought, wow, I got lucky on the day. And so when you're kind of taught those systematic things of, the luck that comes with it, as opposed to being blessed, I used to always say I'm really lucky that I had those opportunities because I'm another. And you're taught to kind of be used to it and be really grateful for just being allowed to share these spaces right the way through now till I'm a bit older, a little bit more experience. I have my own child, and also I've been doing a lot of engagement and outreach from a really, really young age. And so having met loads of people and then started getting to the space where other people saw something in me and were helping me, I'd be remiss not to name drop. So Ian Smith, who's board member of Women in Transport, sits on our intersectionality advisory group, and I co-deliver lead with. I've known him for about 15 years. I remember he was at TfL when I met him, and I was at TfL, different capacities. I remember meeting Ian and thinking, this is somebody who's in a different part of their career. I'd really love to learn from this person. So that was me kind of putting him into the space of what a mentor would look like. So with him, I've gone really naturally onto this journey of mentor, ally, champion, sponsor, but really unconsciously. And it's only in having these conversations around intersectionality and then now into allyship that I can really put names to all of that journey and really kind of put terms to what's happened. But there have been times in my life where he's coached me, where he's mentored me, and now he's absolutely an ally, a champion, a sponsor. And I've seen that in my career, although we've only started to actually work together over the last couple of years. But how that's made me feel is really accepted, having somebody who tells you that the rules of the game, and you didn't really know there was a game. So for me, it's part of that, saying how to work these different spaces, these different rules, what's expected of you, what's not expected of you. But the burden of change is never on the person. But for me, I've absolutely been able to find my voice. And I never say find my voice. I always think that women need spaces to use their voice. But I think when you are othered so much in your life,
I completely hear you, Shireen. And I love this, what you said. It's not about finding your voice, it's using your voice. Thank you so much for
So I
sharing
didn't
that.
mean to get emotional, but I think when you're othered so much, you are told that you don't have a voice, and you need somebody just to help you out and say your voice is there. Scratch through the crap, and your voice is there. And so I'll probably end it on that. And I think the tears. Ian is going to laugh when he listens to this, but I think Women in Transport is such an organisation where everyone that I've spoken to is an ally. And Gary, you're an example of that, where we have such rich conversations. David, hearing the work that you're doing, absolutely. And we came across each other just through a workplace meeting, but to hear that you don't even see yourself as an ally, but you clearly are. And then Hira, for you to go on that whole journey to then talking about and teaching people in a really accessible way, I feel like this is what benefiting from an allyship looks like, because I'm in a space where I'm hosting podcasts, I'm delivering roundtables, I can be of influence and I can be of help, and hopefully then I'm keeping that ladder down for other people as well.
Excellent. And I think actually leaving that ladder down is a good point to say thank you very much to our guests for this podcast. I think it's been really insightful. I've taken loads of takeaways and I've got lots of insights from it, and I'm sure the audience have as well. Thank you very much, everyone.
You've been listening to the Women in Transport podcast. Join us next time as we hear more from the women in our sector. Please visit the website for more details on how to become a member of Women in Transport, and remember to like, follow and share this podcast.